Hello, I'm Barbara Kellner, manager of the Columbia Archives. For those who have lived in Columbia, Maryland a long time, Jim Rouse is a household name, a name that's continually invoked while speaking of Columbia's vision and planning for its future. Yet for everyone who knew him or of him, there are those who are completely unaware of the man and his remarkable legacy. This program is for everyone to learn more about Jim Rouse, his importance to life in Columbia, and his influence in the world. We have brought together a variety of people who have been personally influenced by Rouse. You'll be hearing from them throughout the program, and I think you'll find their stories inspirational. One of our guests is Josh Olson, author of Better Places, Better Lives, a biography of James Rouse. Many people knew Rouse better than Josh, but no one has read more about him and by him.
I decided to write a biography of him really for two reasons. Well, for three reasons. The first being that no one had done a biography of him. I started this project in 2001, and he passed away in '96. So it had been 5 years, and there had not been a comprehensive biography of Rouse at that point. But the two reasons why I decided that it was worthwhile spending that amount of time learning about Rouse and writing about Rouse were, first, the influence that he had. The number of things he did was absolutely amazing, any one of which would have been enough to make him a great figure in history and in planning and in architecture. The second reason that I was interested in him is that there was always a moral motive to what he was doing. It wasn't, I'm going to build a shopping mall and make a lot of money. It was, I'm going to build a shopping mall. This is going to be the center of the suburbs. It's the 1950s. There's no focus. The suburbs are burgeoning and growing, and people don't have any place to interact. I'm going to build this mall. It's going to be the 1950s equivalent of the Village Green. And no matter what he was doing, it was always because he thought it would make people's lives better. It would lead to a better America.
Can you give us a sense of what made Jim Rouse the kind of caring developer that you describe?
It's a good question, and I dedicated 400 pages of the book to trying to figure that out. And there were definitely a lot of early influences on his life that I think led to this. The biggest being the place where he grew up. He grew up in Easton, Maryland, was born in 1914. And I think that period, the 1910s in American history, was the heyday of the American small town. I think the small town had reached its peak. Agriculture was still prosperous. These small towns were still prosperous, and yet they hadn't been overrun by any other commercial influences. So Rouse grew up in a place where he not only could walk all the streets and walk to school and walk to the post office and the grocery store, but he also knew the postmaster and knew all his teachers and knew where they lived. It was this very close, tight-knit community, and a very prosperous, successful one. While Rouse was growing up, Easton paved its streets and built a new high school, and there was this very progressive ideal that was common in rural America at that time. And Rouse came from that and was part of it. And I think he spent much of the rest of his life trying to recreate it, trying to build these places where people could come together and interact in the same way that he had interacted with his town when he was growing up.
Did you find a common thread in Jim Rouse's life?
Well, in talking to people, there were definitely some common threads. First of all, there was Rouse's down-home manner. He was very easy to get along with. He had a bit, not really of a southern twang to his voice, but a Eastern Shore accent, which made him, he wasn't at all brusque, a very casual manner of speaking, of dressing, and of interacting with people.
He was down home, easy to get along with, super brilliant. He wore penny loafers and traveled in coach. That's how I first met him. He was in coach and I was in first class, and I was going to meet him, which was strange.
He was absolutely natural. I mean, when you sat down and talked to him, you had the feeling that you had known him forever.
When we first came to Columbia, I had to work an extra job because we have a large family. So I worked at the Giant at Wild Lake, which of course is gone now, but then it was pretty much the only store in Columbia. And I worked there in the evenings. And what happened was Jim and his wife would come in the evening and do their shopping together. And when they got to the register, she would put the stuff up on the counter, and Jim walked all the way around and bagged the stuff from the other side. And this was something that maybe 1 in 100 customers would do. Otherwise, I'd have to bag it myself. That's how I got to know him.
For somebody who was a highly successful real estate developer, which has connotations of private jets and 6 homes and flashy, yachts and so forth. And this person had gotten to know Jim a fair amount, and Jim and Patty had a home down on the Eastern Shore, and they talked about it, and this person was from down there. And so he learned enough to know where the house was, and so he was out on the water himself and said, well, I'm just going to go take a peek at Jim's house, which is one of those things, if you're a boat person, you can really poke around and snoop on people and so forth. So he went up and he saw Jim's house, which was a nice house, but not a palace by any means. And he saw the boat, and Jim had always, I know, he talked about being out on his boat, and he really loved that. And he went up to this sort of wooden boat that was not highly polished, not a flashy boat at all, and he couldn't read the name, so he really came up closer. And on the back of the stern, where the names of boats are put, he read it, and he got up close, and he said, and the name of the boat was The Adequate. And that was kind of Jim. I mean, he had enough in him to sort of say, I'm going to poke some of these folks in the eye who feel like they need a great big boat and a helicopter on it and all this stuff. I like being out on the water, but my feet are still on the planet.
Well, the one thing, as a next-door neighbor, he was a next-door neighbor. He wasn't Jim Rouse, the head of the Rouse Company, the man of the year on Time magazine. He was the man he was a neighbor, and he didn't put on any airs or anything like that. He was just totally natural, and he didn't regard himself as super citizen of Columbia. He was just a resident. I remember when he moved in. In Columbia, you can't change anything on the exterior of your house unless you have covenant approval. And when he moved into the house, he was fixing it up and painted the front door yellow. And the Wild Lake Covenant advisors slapped him with a covenant violation. And he wrote, rather than saying, hey, wait, he wrote them back and he said, my face is red because my door is yellow, and he immediately applied for a covenant permission to do it.
He lived in a regular house here. He didn't have a big mansion someplace. He lived in a regular house, and he was a regular guy. As I say, came to the store and was like that. If he were here today, I'd have to go up and hug him because I just, he made it possible for us to raise 9 kids successfully.
David Rockefeller came to town, and Jim was showing him Columbia, wanted to show him all about Columbia. And David Rockefeller, at that time, I think was head of the Chase Manhattan Bank. And so Jim asked if I would drive along with them while he showed them. And we walked all around Wild Lake. You look at the swim center and Slayton House, and at that time the cheese shop and butcher shop and so on. And then we got in the car, and if anybody that knows Jim knows he was a terrible, terrible driver. And I think the reason he was a terrible driver is he wasn't interested in driving. He was interested in everything that was going on around. And so we were driving along into Harper's Choice, and he was pointing out, there's the athletic club, there's this, there's that, and looking, pointing each way. And we went around by the school there and went right through a stop sign. And all of a sudden, sirens started wailing behind us, and the cop pulled us over to the side of the road, and he said, the cop came over, may I see your driver's license, please? Oh, yes. He pulled it out, and he said, you went through the stop sign. Oh, officer, I'm so sorry. And they gave him a ticket, and he said, thank you very much, thank you. And then when the officer left, David Rockefeller said, well, I see how much influence you have in Columbia. But that was Jim. He didn't, try to say, do you know who I am, or anything like that.
That Rouse was a salesperson, not a hard sell type person, but countless people I interviewed said he was the type of person who could sell ice to Eskimos. He was just that persuasive. When you were with him, you just really wanted to do whatever he was doing.
He had this quiet demeanor about him, but very forceful when it came to his commitment to the lifestyle that he felt was good for America.
He had wonderful abilities that you wouldn't know about until later. He was late in his 60s, and my wife and I were trying to park our car at an event that both he and Patty and Janet Marie and I were going to, and we just didn't think we could get the car in. I was inching it in, and so he came up to me and he said, "I'll bet you $5 I can park that car." And we were always kidding. I said, "Okay, you're on. I'll bet you $5. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my car over $5. And he didn't just inch the car in. He revved it up, and like a parking lot attendant, and screech, and in it went. There was no room for maneuver on either side of it. And I said, "Good Lord, I'm glad to pay you the $5 because my car is intact, but how'd you do that?" And he said, "Well, when I was unemployed and going to night law school, I needed a job. And so I went to this parking lot, and they needed a parking lot attendant. And I volunteered myself. And the guy said, 'Okay, great. Any other questions?' He said, 'Well, I just think I should tell you that I've never driven before, but I'll learn real quickly on it.'" He had his license, he hadn't driven, and he learned very well, as I found out years later.
I would accompany Jim as we'd go up and talk to all the financial institutions in Philadelphia about why the Rouse Company ought to rebuild their downtown area. Okay. An amusing story, I was going up to the opening of this project, and we're riding on the train, and Jim, as he tended to do, was scribbling literally on sort of the back of an envelope. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, you know, the governor's going to be there and both senators and so forth. I've got to make some remarks." And he's scribbling away. And I said, "This is it?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, so then I sort of blurted out, "Shouldn't you have done this a long time ago?" And he said, no, this is the way I do it." We got up to the opening, and Jim had on, which was he tended to do, these sort of worn-out plaid sport coats with kind of a not particularly matching tie, and went up to the podium, and the governor was there and both state senators, and I'm just in the back in the crowd, and somebody says, "Who's that funny-looking bald guy in the plaid jacket?" And I said, "Well, that's Jim Rouse." He says, "That's Jim Rouse?" And I said, "Yeah, just wait till he speaks." And I'm thinking, gee, he just wrote this. But he got up, gave this incredibly eloquent speech, brought a huge crowd to absolute silence, and the guy said to me, literally says, "Hey, he's really something, isn't he?" And he was. He was a great person who had the ability to show that through the way he communicated. But that was kind of Jim in a way. There was a bit of the dreamer that was kind of pushing you. Occasionally it wasn't that practical, but most of the time it was connected to real possibilities, though they may have been beyond what other people thought were real possibilities.
Many people I talked to commented on the fact, these are people who knew Rouse well, who knew him intimately, commented on the fact that they always expected to find the flaw in him, to find the feet of clay to this giant, and they never did. They could spend hours working by Rouse's side and would never see him deviate from this vision he had. It wasn't a front, it wasn't a facade that he put on to get his projects accepted. It's what he truly believed, and he lived his entire life based on the fact that we could be creating better places.
He had such clear beliefs, such a strong moral, ethical, and sense of what was possible, what could be done, that it not only brought the best out in you, it excited you, and in that excitement, you wanted to be part of it. And so it obviously brought the best out in you.
He was a really great visionary and a man, in spite of all of the power that he had, a man of integrity that I really respected. And I think one of the the things that at least he did for me was he was able to bring out the best in people. He was able to bring out whatever talent or whatever quality that you had. He could sort of hone in on that and tap into that and just make people really feel good about themselves. And that's what I admired about him the most.
And many of his colleagues, who would be Al Taubman or Mel and Herb Simon or the Bucksbaum family, were perfectly fine, honorable people, but they ran their businesses and they became literally billionaires. That was never Jim's goal. He ran his company to try to change the communities he was in, and everybody who worked for him or with him could see that. So his intent was never to make a lot of money for himself or become famous or do any of that. He set an example that you tried to emulate, to say, you really want to help people. More than any person I ever met in my life, he cared about the individual, every individual. And so as his work evolved over time from the many years of founding and expanding the Rouse Company, and he moved on to found Enterprise after leaving the Rouse Company at 65 years old, this caring about the individual meant he wanted to help the people who, in a way, most needed the help. He was looking at the underserved in the country, the people with very low incomes who didn't have housing, who, as he used to say, with great outrage in this incredibly wealthy country, never came close to the gravy train. They didn't get good schooling, they didn't get good housing, they really didn't get a chance. And he devoted his life to that, and that was so clear in what he did that if you were around him, you could not help but be influenced that.
I looked at Jim as somewhat of a messiah, in fact. Because of his mesmerizing personality, his commitment to social justice, his commitment to economic justice as well. Those kinds of issues that he was very much committed to. And not only was he influential here in Columbia and in Maryland, but he was an international figure as it relates to the opportunities for people to live together, to enjoy God's creation together as equals, as opposed to having separate groups and separate ideals.
Jim was an unusual mix. Having gone to Harvard Business School, worked on Wall Street, the first thing I noticed when I came in is that he had the strangest schedule that you would ever see. He would be meeting with Bob McNamara, and then he would be meeting with sort of key people in the company, and in the middle would be a meeting with a kid from Columbia who had a question about whether he should go to college or not, and had written a letter to Jim. And there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to that schedule. It was not prioritized. It had all of life flowing into it. And I often, it was a long schedule. He obviously got to the critical things he needed to get to, but he never pushed out life or questions from people that were ordinarily just struggling with life's decision. He would see people from Columbia, he would see old friends, he would squeeze them into that calendar. And so it was very unscientific, but full of life.
I think anybody who met him, just walking around the lake, going in the Giant or so on, they felt totally comfortable talking to him, and when he talked to them, he would give you the feeling that you were the most important person in the room or in the store or around the lake or whatever it may be, just because he was so interested in you. And I think he was quite extraordinary in that sense.
He was the parent that everybody would like to have, that is critical and in a way pushing you beyond yourself, but also incredibly supportive and clearly hoping for your success. He was a completely secure man himself. He didn't need to demean anybody else to be strong and successful in his own eyes. He knew what he was doing. It's often said he was truly he was a great man. It was in his caring for people And it was in his gifts, because he was not a caring people without skills. He was a caring person with a great ability to verbalize that caring, and a great ability to talk other people into doing that which you never thought they'd do. They never thought they'd do until Jim came up and talked them into it.
I think he set the example. Sometimes people talk, but they don't do the walk. And to me, he was a very genuine person, very thoughtful. I'd say exuded honesty and caring. And I believe you get caught up in those beliefs because he just had this innate feeling about people, that people are the best there is, and that in humankind, there's so many things that we have to deal with, have to think about, but he could always find the best in people, and often said, we're not perfect, but what we come together and do can contribute so much to mankind.
Yeah, I think he's one of the great Americans. I have met some important people in my lifetime, but I think he's the greatest.
The number of things he did was absolutely amazing, any one of which would have been enough to make him a great figure in history and in planning and in architecture. Yet for him, it was just one thing after another. So it was mortgage banking. He was one of the first bankers to do no money down loans, which basically allowed people to own homes at a rate, at a level that was unprecedented in American history. And then from mortgage banking, he went on to building shopping malls. He was the first real estate developer to build a shopping mall. And then from shopping malls, he went on to be involved with the federal government and their urban renewal program. He was basically responsible for the creation of the urban renewal program in 1954. But it didn't end there. From there, he went on to building Columbia, and from Columbia, he went on to doing the festival marketplaces, like Harbor Place in Baltimore. And after that, he supposedly retired, but that really meant that he just went on to doing something else, which was to found the Enterprise Foundation, which was involved, still is involved in the production of low-income housing. It's one of the biggest organizations involved in that in the country. So there were all these things, one thing after another, that Rouse was involved with, and that obviously make him important and worthy of writing about. Then there's the landscape itself. There's both the projects that Rouse directly developed. So there's the malls that he built and the festival marketplaces. So Boston is a better city because it has Faneuil Hall Marketplace. And then there are all the copies. As we all know, developers copied the shopping mall all over the country, and they lost some of what Rouse originally intended for it. And the festival marketplaces, like Harbor Place, were also copied all over the country.
I think he was one of the great thinkers about urban America. It wasn't just business, it was how do you use business to create human spaces.
You know, I look back and actually the greater distance between, you know, my present life and those years, 82 to 92 with Mr. Rouse, I realized really how advanced he was. I mean, way, way ahead of trends, you know, so far ahead that we didn't see it as a trend. It just was Jim Rouse, but later on, you know, it's been codified in books and, you know, management seminars.
When Faneuil Hall was built up in Boston, the rebuilding of that historic project, I mean, I was at the company then, and I think 75% of the people in the Rouse company thought he was nuts. If you've been up there, it's a wonderful project now. It was not a wonderful area or project then. It was a rundown mess. We thought, all this money, what is he doing? This is just nuts. He's really kind of lost it here. Well, it turned out to be a fabulous piece of real estate, sparked a lot of business for the company, but more importantly, it sparked a lot of interest in urban renewal in the country. And that's why he landed on the cover of Time magazine, because that was such a change of direction when everything was going to the suburbs, and he was able to catch people's attention, and he cared about cities. He said, there is a way. People like to be in cities. They like that closeness. They like having all the facilities available. The suburbs are fine, but they aren't for everybody, and we need to revitalize our cities, and he did it.
And when you look at new fields in Columbia, in Ohio, you look at Mission Viejo out in California, you look at Cedar Riverside up in New York, and in those places, you can see that Jim's impact, Jim's influence was there. And then when he utilized the Rouse Company to go to these various places and build structures, he was assured that there was not only economic integration in that, but he made sure that he had racial impact in all of those developments around the country. Very significant.
And Enterprise is, of course, based in Columbia, directly as a result of Jim Rouse. It is a nonprofit that owns socially screened for-profits, all of which are contributing to decent, affordable housing and a path up and out of poverty for low-income people. It right now raises over about $1.2 billion a year and puts it back out through grassroots organizations all across the country. And we recently dedicated our 200,000th home. It was dedicated with a formerly homeless woman who now has a decent place to live.
I think that Rouse's legacy can be divided into a number of different components. First of all, there were all the people he influenced. His company, the Rouse Company, is known amongst the people who work there as Rouse University. Many people went there, learned how to do real estate development the Rouse way, and then left to start their own real estate companies or work for other companies or go into architecture or go into planning. So there are all those people who were directly influenced by Rouse.
And unquestionably, Jim Rouse changed my life, in my opinion. He gave me focus. He gave me a sense of purpose. He gave me to understand other people and their frailties and their strengths and to deal with them and accept them. And I don't think I would have gone that way. I think he was so influential in my life as becoming a better person. And I think I'm a good person. And as becoming a better husband and a better father and a better business person and dealing with all aspects of business and respecting other people in business.
Well, I was a young architect just starting out when I met him. And he treated me like an equal. He didn't, he wasn't pompous or distancing. And I used to walk in on the land at Columbia before anything was built. I'd walk with him and we'd talk about all kinds of subjects. And at the time, he gave me comfort that I could engage somebody like that in the beginning of my career, and that he would take me seriously and would be instructive. And even though his tastes were certainly not to where my architecture was going, and we had conflicts about that at the time, he was very supportive and didn't arbitrarily stop me from doing my best work under his umbrella. So he was a teacher, certainly.
As a young professional, I think that most of us who had an opportunity to work here were blessed with his passion. I mean, he had an enormous passion for life and for bringing people together of all nationalities and color, and he also brought a lot of very, very, I think, outstanding people to work. So it was probably maybe the best place in America to work.
There are lots of alums of Rouse U, and there are several reasons for that. One is a practical reason. Jim really didn't care about money, and when I joined the Rouse Company in 1973, I came out of an MBA program at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I was in the top part of my class, and the placement director tells me I think I was the worst paid job coming out of there, and he said, "This is terrible pay," but I said, "I love this company. It's a great place." And he said, "Well, if you do, go ahead and go there." Many people came to work for the Rouse Company then. Jim set his own pay very low. The pyramid came out under that, and people came and worked for a couple years. They loved it. It was a graduate school. It was Rouse U.
And he taught us a great deal also. I think he was aware, I would guess, that we, the young people that came to work, young adults for him in the 80s, that we were his last class, in essence, to graduate from the University of Mr. Rouse. And he took perhaps extra special care to give us advice and, you know, follow people's yearnings. He said, you follow people's yearnings and execute well on fulfilling those, and you will be successful. And said if you strive to be successful first and foremost, then you really have it backwards. You need to meet the objectives of the consumer, of the public, of the residents, and do a really good job of it, and success will just naturally follow.
There are lots of others that have been touched by Jim who are turning in their own right to be leaders and to carry on his vision and his ideals. But all of us are a little bit different, and you know, you always go back to the person. And I resisted Jim for years. His thinking, I thought he was crazy. I'd go, "You're crazy, Jim. You're crazy." And before you know it, if you're with him long enough, his thinking becomes your thinking, because it's so essential and so motivating and so important and seems right to me. So the more we can get his story out, the more leaders we'll have and the more people that are doing their part.
I did spend a lot of time with Mr. Rouse, you know, directly, personally, and I often asked him, you know, probably 3 or 4 times over the course of several years, what is it you're most proud of? Because he had a long list of things he could choose from, and he always answered consistently, Columbia. He was most proud of Columbia because it's a living, breathing place that gives life to 100,000 people or 300,000 people, or if you ask the Rouse Company today, that it's 600,000 people market area. But it's that living, breathing community that fosters growth and learning and relationships that he was the most proud of.
It was nice to have somebody who was really responsible for the starting Columbia care about the details. I mean, he was a man who didn't care about he didn't just care about the big concept, he cared about the details. He had this wonderful expression, which again, you've probably heard about, warm and friendly. Got to create things that are warm and friendly. And it was almost his philosophy that if you developed something that was warm and friendly, everybody would love it. And I think that's kind of that spirit certainly prevailed.
I listened a lot in the Exhibit Center building to Jim Rouse's booming voice, and he would say that Columbia was going to be an open and caring community, and people would live and work and play together. And I wasn't so sure about that, because I was coming out of 1960, where lots of things had happened. Assassinations, Martin Luther King, our president and all, race riots. I couldn't believe that Columbia would be an open city at all. So reluctantly, my husband moved us here, I being the doubting Thomas of all, and was just ready to kind of clam up in this house, and if people really didn't want to have anything to do with us, then so be it. And our kids at that time were 8 months, 2 and 4. And here we were in this place that this gentleman had talked about on a slideshow that was going to be a nice city to be in. The first reality I believe that I had to where I could truly believe in Jim Rouse's dream was the day before we moved into our house. And we'd put out some plants and had all 3 kids with us, and the real estate agent was going to meet us at that point to let us in. It was very hot because this was in July. And across the street came a white woman, which is what I would have termed it, termed that person back in the 70s. And she had a pitcher of lemonade and glasses. And as she came over and said hello, said her name was Cindy Hood, and welcome to the neighborhood. Now I'm just being very skeptical, you know, standing back, not knowing what does this woman want. And she just said, I saw you and the kids out here and thought you might be hot, so I bought a pitcher of lemonade over some glasses. And she told us we didn't have to rush to drink it. She said she was going to leave it for us. And as she walked away, I remarked to myself, there must be something to this city. There must be something to what this Jim Rouse said, because it was the first time I'd ever been served by a white woman with glasses in my life. My drinks had always been out of a paper cup. And you might say at that point, that was a turning point for me to believe in something that a man was saying whom I hadn't met at that time.
They started to build houses in Columbia, and one of the most prominent home builders in the Maryland Home Builders Association was building houses in one of the areas, I think in Runningbrook, and he was selling, and he was building elsewhere in Columbia also, and he was selling them to black families in Runningbrook. And when a white family would come, the builder would say, you know, I've been selling homes to black families here. You might be more comfortable in another area of Columbia. And Rouse heard about this, and he was horrified. And he sent people out to make sure this was true, and it was. So he told the home builder, and this was a very prominent home builder, he told him he would not sell him another inch of land in Columbia. He wanted him not to build any houses in Columbia, and he wanted to put a stop to that. And he sat down, and I think this is one of the really, really, really important documents in Columbia's history. He wrote a memorandum, signed it himself, and sent it to every developer and all of their sales representatives, associates in Columbia. And he said, it's important for all of us who are selling houses or lots or renting apartments in Columbia to understand that it is a truly open city. Simply stated, we're colorblind. This means that every person or family coming to Columbia to seek a lot, an apartment, a house, to start a business, will be treated alike regardless of whether the color of his skin is white, black, brown, or yellow. All people will be shown the courtesy and attention by sales personnel that is appropriate to their interest regardless of color. They will be free to select any lot, any house or apartment without restriction, persuasion, or influence because of their race. He said, we really mean that Columbia is an open city. We ask that you make it a fixed policy in your company for a copy of this memorandum to be provided to every single person who deals with the public in any way, in order that there can be no room for misunderstanding among us. I mean, that is in 1967. Columbia is still, Howard County is still a segregated county. He thought this was important and was one of his main goals for Columbia. And he kept at it in every aspect. And if you look at Columbia today, I think and it's a monument to Jim, it is probably the most successful racially integrated community in the country. I don't think there's a village, a neighborhood, a street, maybe even a cul-de-sac in Columbia that isn't racially integrated. And that didn't happen, just happen. It happened because Jim Rouse made it happen. And he made it happen because he thought it's the right thing to do, it's the moral thing to do, and he was a very very devout, not in a piety way, but just here in his heart person.
It used to be that the Interfaith Center in Wild Lake was the most integrated church in the world, in fact, on a Sunday morning, because you had all of these different church groups, not only integrated racially, but ethnically as well. Because, you know, people from all, as well as religious dogmas as well, because you had all the Catholics, you had the Jews, and you had the Lutherans, and you had the Methodists and the Baptists, all coming together to worship together.
Well, Columbia, of course, to me is a place like a swan where you can come and live and be fly free, open up and fly free forever.
When I was growing up, about 5 years old, I lived in a trailer with no electricity, no running water, and all I remember one day is we picked up and we moved to Columbia. And I know if it wasn't for James Rouse putting aside that land for affordable housing, that my family would not have been able to live here. And I'm just so thankful to him for, you know, putting aside that land, because my life would have been different. But somebody like me that came from living in the conditions that I lived in would never have been able to live in Columbia if it wasn't for him putting aside that land. And like, I don't knock other cities, like I don't want to say anything bad about Baltimore City or Washington, D.C., but I'm just so thankful that I was able to grow up in a nice area and that I'm able to raise my son here as well.
Thing in terms of Jim Rouse's philosophy, as you know now, Jim Rouse's philosophy permeates, I hope I'm pronouncing that word correctly, permeates all of Howard County now. It wasn't that way before. And I'm constantly in hope of the fact that more places like Columbia develop, because I can assure any city that develops a place like Columbia that you got more justice, you got more fairness.
He mesmerizes people with his forward thinking about what community should be, about relationships would be with people in community, and how you go about setting forth vehicles in community where people can grow. And grow at that particular time, you know, the civil rights movement was towards the ends of its activities. But he wanted to make sure that Columbia, in fact, really represented America, the ideals of Martin Luther King and those people who were trying to say that America should be for all people and everybody had an opportunity here.
I wrote a poem to him, and he was out of town when I wrote the poem. It got published in the Flyer. And when he came back in town, he sent me a letter, a thank you letter. To Jim Rouse, the Columbia creator, how many ideas in man's mind forfeit through outward oppress or inward inert? How many projects turn stillborn at birth through lack of vision by those who see no worth? Choice, not chance, keeps hoisting the beams. We love our Columbia, even its extremes. One man brought others with him out on a limb. Unaccustomed they were, but they believed in him. It took a bespectacled, quiet, hallelujah man to deliver it all and make us his fan. Thanks, Jim, your Columbia was a gem of an ocean. Come on, folks, our Columbia, let's keep it in motion, and we pray our children keep our devotion.
I think Columbia is probably the luckiest of Rouse's projects in terms of his legacy, because in Rouse, Columbia has a patron saint. It has this moral barometer for the decisions that face the community. So people can stand up at CA meetings and ask, what would Rouse do? And there's all the stories about Rouse and what he did during the planning process and how he talked about love and about how he crawled through a field in the Patuxent Valley and said, we want to keep this as open space because a certain bird is mating here. There's all those stories, and most of them are true, and some of them are myths. And then there's just the idea that this person had a bigger vision for Columbia than it was just going to be a place where people lived and worked. It was going to be a place to grow people. And as Columbia moves forward, people can continue to ask, are we creating a place to grow people?
As a business person, I perhaps admire him more than anybody I've ever met and am ever likely to meet. He just was a person of great compassion. He operated his company out of the philosophy that if the company goes about doing good works, then profits will naturally follow.
I think Jim Rouse taught me how to love community, and I feel like I was always born caring about people. But I believe he paved the way by having, it's like having clay that's not in any particular shape or form, but you are able to mold it. And to me, seeing what he was willing to do, it's like he didn't stop to, at least in my opinion, do a whole lot for himself. He was always reaching for the next level to either to put something in place that would help people to grow, to help us to experience what we're about, to help us to reach out to others.
The business world tends to make a lot of money, and then they give back. They do their charity after they've made the money. Jim Rouse incorporated the charity into the making of money, and that was unique, very unique.
Jim Rouse had a tremendous influence on me, which is remarkable since I didn't know him. But my parents moved to Columbia in 1971 and bought into the Rouse vision, his values, his dream for a community based on the values that I talk about quite a bit: acceptance, diversity, opportunity for all. And my parents, who were living in Baltimore City, were from Baltimore City, and were looking for a place to raise their kids that truly embraced those values, values which they shared. And so I talk quite a bit about how strongly I feel that the values that guide my private and public decision-making emanate from, first, my parents, but secondly, my community. And that was a community that was shaped by Jim Rouse.
Jim had unbounded optimism. He walked in every day as if it was the greatest day that had ever been invented. So you had this huge optimism. He was very positive about what we were trying to do. He was unbowed by challenges. He saw what he felt ought to happen in our society, which clearly was not, and felt that we could change, that people can change the direction of history, can change the direction of your life, can change the direction of a society by entering in, giving your voice. He was absolutely convinced that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they were given the tools to do them. And that's what he worked for. Day in and day out, he saw potential. In every terrible situation, I could see the terrible situation, he would see the positive things that could be done in that situation.
I think what I liked about him was that kind of naivete that he had. With all his brilliance, he was willing to jump off a cliff and go into areas where he didn't, he wasn't an expert, but and to take the chance that he was going to be made fun of. He didn't have that kind of ego, that he worried about that. And that was most gracious and most memorable thing I know about him.
Jim Rouse proved that you could make a dollar by being socially conscious about your business. And that's the most significant thing that I can really gather from it. And we need a lot more people like Jim Rouse in our country now. And there are a precious few. There are precious few. And that's very unfortunate that we're not able to find people like that with that vision about what life in America should be.
If you had a chance to ask Rouse one question, what would it be?
I think I would ask Rouse whether he thinks there are other Jim Rouses out there. Because that's always he was such an amazing person and accomplished so much. And a lot of people who were influenced by him hope to do that, although I think we all know that we're going to fall short. And I would want to know whether Rouse thinks that there are other people who are going to do as much as he did.
And how do you think he would answer it?
Oh, I think he would definitely say that there are other people out there. He was always optimistic and believed in the best of people and usually brought it out. So I think he would think that there's many, many other Rouses out there, and hopefully we will be so lucky. You read biographies of great people, and something that I think the average person finds impressive is the amount of energy that those people had. And Rouse was definitely one of those people. When he first moved to Baltimore in the 1930s, he got a job parking cars and eventually moved up to basically handling the accounts for this parking garage. At the same time, he was going to night law school. And eventually was working a double shift at the garage and still going to night law school. So Rouse was getting no more than 4 hours of sleep a night. And he did that for the rest of his life. He discovered a wellspring of energy that he had that just kept him going. So he would leave the office every day with a briefcase full of memos, go home to his family, they'd have dinner and spend some family time together. Then everyone else would go to sleep, and Rouse would stay up for another 3 or 4 hours transcribing or dictating responses to these memos, and by the time he went back to the office the next morning, the whole briefcase would be complete.